Hello, good afternoon and welcome to this BBC News Facebook Live. We're here at George Washington University. My name is Harry Lowe and we're going to be here for the next 10-15 minutes taking your questions on fake news. There is a UK committee here, a select committee in the US this week, and they've been taking questions and evidence from the likes of Google, Facebook and Twitter this week, and this afternoon we've been hearing some particularly interesting testimony, and one of those people on the committee, I'm glad to say, is Major Garrett, who's the chief White House correspondent for our affiliate CBS. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Great to be with you.
First of all, what to you is fake news?
News that isn't true is one form of fake news. Another form is news that is generated, that is knowingly fake, that is injected into any political conversation with the intention of disrupting the conversation and therefore the underlying politics around it. So in our country, fake news is a new term for an old criticism. Politicians don't like a story that puts them in an unfavorable light, him or her, and they try to deflect it or delegitimize it. That's as old as our country. It's given this new name, fake news, which has kind of a weaponized sense to it. Then there's this other thing that is intentionally injected false information meant to destabilize a conversation. There are two different phenomena, and one of the problems with fake news is which are we talking about? And the committee did a very good job, I think, throughout the day, so far as I've been able to understand, trying to put those two in the proper silos and then scrutinize them appropriately.
And just for those of our viewers here who weren't able to hear and watch the testimony, just run us through that example you gave right at the front about junk food and how you tie this together.
So look, I've been in a lot of different American journalistic ecosystems. Some may remember that I used to be on Fox News. For some parts of the American political spectrum, I was a purveyor of fake news for the simple reason that I worked at Fox News. When I left Fox News, then I went to National Journal. And some of the people who used to watch me on Fox would see me on MSNBC and then call me fake news there. Why? Because I was on a different team, or I was coming from what they viewed as a different ratifying perspective. I was the exact same journalist doing exactly the same kind of work. So I've lived through this cycle. I've been lionized and then criticized and lionized by different audiences, just depending on which camera I stood in front of. Okay? So I've lived this phenomenon of either someone saying I'm an incredible journalist, meaning nothing I can say or do say should be believed, and yet doing what I believed every day was believable journalism, was credible journalism, was everything that I've ever believed journalism should be, accurate, fair, curious, balanced, all those sorts of things. But because of the orientation of the audience and its orientation to what it was expecting, I could be viewed differently. That's a huge phenomenon, completely separate from fake news. That's just what you're comfortable with, what your own personal bandwidth is, and what your own personal predilections are. So if someone says, well, that kind of news is junk food, as I said to the committee, the people who are consuming it think it's spinach and broccoli. They think it's the most fortifying news they've ever consumed because they're most comfortable with it. So we should be careful about this terminology. What people are consuming, it's bad for them. They think it's good for them, and we have to understand and appreciate what they value on the front end of it and why they're valuing it and what that tells us about the ecosystem journalistically we're operating in.
And thanks for all your questions coming in. We've actually had one from Claire, which ties into the last point you made, Major Garrett, which is how new is this fake news phenomenon?
So in my written testimony for the committee, I went back and talked about American politicians, presidents only, who tried to get around the media, who tried to criticize the media, who tried to control the media. Abraham Lincoln, one of the greatest American presidents ever, used to give statements, public letters to favored newspapers and favored newspaper editors to not only go around the reporters who worked for that newspaper, but go around the entire journalistic set of obstacles to unfiltered deliver exactly what he wanted to say to exactly whom he wanted to deliver it. It wasn't, I said in my testimony, the modern-day equivalent of a tweet. That's Abraham Lincoln, okay? Herbert Hoover, when he was American president, was so angry about gossip around the White House, he issued a decree. No newspaper should publish anything that is not ratified by this White House. Didn't work, but he tried it. FDR tried to badger and bully reporters into giving him more favorable coverage. He used the radio to sidestep everyone in the journalistic community that was getting in the way of his message. This is not a new phenomenon. The idea that journalists are criticized and their work is scrutinized, that's not new. The thing I do worry about with fake news is I've seen this as I've traveled the world. We have a robust democracy and a long-standing one in the First Amendment. Countries that are experimenting with democracy don't. And authoritarians are taking hold of this concept and bludgeoning an emerging free press and repressing people under the guise of fake news. If there's anything about this debate that disturbs me deeply, it's that.
Now, Major, you've been a journalist since 1984, as you were
Correct.
saying. You transferred into television in the 21st century, around the turn of the 21st century. Barry's asking us, have you ever had to retract a story?
I've never had to retract a story. I've had, in my career, dating back to 1984, 6 corrections in my life. Every one of them deeply, existentially painful. When I was a newspaper reporter, I literally wanted an eraser large enough to go to every doorstep in the community I lived in to erase the thing I screwed up. Never a retraction. Corrections, one mistake, a fact error that had to be corrected for the record the very next day. 6 in however many years from 1984 to present.
24 years.
Not bad.
Yeah, I'd
Not
say
great, but not bad.
Yeah.
And it happens, but you work as hard as you possibly can, and you take as a deep wound not only to yourself, but what you're trying to accomplish if you get it wrong. I do.
We had another question coming from Alonzo. Thanks for your questions. Keep them coming in. Alonzo wants to know, what is the legality of spreading fake news?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, okay? We don't have any kind of prior restraint or legal structure around news that is truthful or untruthful, except if it falls into the category of libel. If you maliciously and knowingly say something that is false and defamatory about someone who's not in the public square, you can be held legally responsible for that, okay? Someone in the public square, you have much more latitude. And all that's been adjudicated throughout the history of our country. So there isn't any prohibition against fake news. My earlier point is news that is not verified and verifiable has found commercial traction. I can't do anything about that except represent things that over time continue to prove themselves to be valid and true, and hope the audience, after, let us say, consuming a little of this stuff that is less than fortifying, decides that verifiable and verified news is. That's a competitive space I'm happy to operate in, but it is a tumultuous and hard place.
Ron, a very good question from you. He wants to know, how can you find a news source that you can trust?
That's a hard thing to do, and I can't give you, the simple answer, CBS, okay. Well, me saying it doesn't do it. Me saying it might do it, but that's your own, Ron, is the questioner. Ron's sense of credibility, Ron's sense of propriety will inform him about that. And it's an evolutionary process, okay? My only, and I told this to the committee, and it's in my written testimony, here's my one guiding sentence on this. If from the moment you wake up to the time you go to sleep at night, everything you've read or watched or listened to that is news makes you feel happy, reaffirmed, verified, and utterly content, you're doing it wrong. Find things that disrupt your own set of interpretations of the world. Give yourself the benefit of news flows that jostle your sense of everything. I'm not asking you to put yourself in a panic every hour. But if every day you go to say, everything I've read makes me just feel great and so reaffirmed and so comfortable, you're doing it wrong.
Rob, thanks for your question. Rob wants to know, how do you know when a politician is lying?
Well, okay, the joke answer is when they're moving the lips. Let's all laugh in unison. Okay. So when I was in journalism school at the University of Missouri, I had a professor who would say, this thing would all make us crack up. That's not just a fact, that's a true fact. What did he mean? Okay, it's a fact that somebody said something. That's a fact. So-and-so said something. A fact. But is what so-and-so said true? That would be a true fact. The Hoover Dam was built in whatever year. Okay, if you get the year wrong, that you said it is a fact. What you said is not a fact, though, because you got the year wrong. That's what a true fact is. So the process of covering politicians is to constantly sift and hold them to a standard of verifiable truth, and then render that to the public so the public can make the judgment, not me. I don't make judgments. I'm not in the business of making judgments. I don't write editorials. I don't write columns. For a while I did, but I don't anymore. Render that and let people decide and back away. And don't tell people what you think. Tell people what you know. And leave it at that.
So here's another one for you. You say you've been doing this 24 years.
Well, let's do the math. 84 to 2004 would be 20 years.
Yeah.
2009 would be 25 years. This is 2018, so
30.
We're almost 34 years.
So 34 years. In 34 years' time, where do you think we will be in relation to this particular issue?
I don't know where we're going to be 34 months from now. And I got to go because I can feel my phone going, so I got to run.
Okay.
I appreciate it,
We
but I got to go.
appreciate your time. Thank
Thanks.
you so much.
Thanks.
Cheers. That's Major Garrett there from CBS. He is an affiliate of the BBC, and he has, as we've established, been in journalism for some time now. Thanks so much for all of your questions. I don't think we are going to be able to find anybody else to speak to you at the moment. We were hoping to grab one of the MPs on the committee, which has, as you may have seen behind me, finished for the day. So I think that's just about going to conclude the Facebook Live here from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Continue the conversation below the line. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time for a BBC News Facebook Live.